Wasn't that grand? Wasn't that grand? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I am so honored to have the opportunity to introduce our speaker today. Our speaker is one who represents the voice of a vast, ordinary world. Cory Booker, Mayor of Newark, New Jersey, and his team have more than doubled the rate of affordable housing production, created the city's largest expansion of parks and recreational spaces in over a century, with nearly 50 acres of new or refurbished parks, and brought more than $1 billion of new economic development to the city, including the first new hotels under construction in the city's downtown in 40 years, and the first new office tower under construction in 20 years. Business attraction has also been a focus for Mayor Booker and his team. They have attracted new large businesses, including Panasonic, Manischewitz, and Audible.com, to relocate their national and international headquarters to Newark. Mayor Booker has attracted national attention for his educational reform efforts, already succeeding in significantly expanding high-quality public education options for families and leading in the creation of new, strong educational and career development opportunities for Newark's disaffected youth. Mayor Booker has also gained wide attention for his implementation and usage of new technologies, ranging from creating the state's largest wireless network on fighting crime technology, including cameras and gunshot detection, to raising the bar on customer service, using social media platforms such as Twitter and Facebook. A brave hero in his own right, Mayor Booker recently entered a home engulfed in flames to rescue his neighbor. Though he suffered second-degree burns and smoke inhalation, the mayor was confident that he had made the right choice. Mayor Booker, you really are an American hero. Mayor Booker received his BA and MA from Stanford University, a BA in modern history at Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar, and completed his law degree at Yale University. Mayor Booker, with your training, experience, and demonstrated leadership abilities, there is no question that a higher calling is in store for you. Therefore, I want you to promise me today that after you are elected governor of New Jersey, you will return to Hampton to speak. And then, after you're elected President of the United States, you must promise me that you will return to Hampton as the commencement speaker. I want that promise today. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our 2012 commencement speaker, Mayor Cory Booker. Mayor Booker.
All right. I see some Jersey in the house. Oh, make a Jersey boy feel at home. So with an introduction like that, I have to go off my prepared remarks and just give a confession to Dr. Harvey, because I treated him wrong when he called me. I acted all important. He's like, I'd like for you to be the commencement speaker at Hampton University. And I said, well, sir, I'm flattered by the request and I am very interested. I'll have to check my schedule and get back to you. He hung up the phone, I hung up the phone, I picked up the phone, dialed my mom real quick, and I said, Mom, guess what? I'm gonna be speaking at Hampton. And so I stand here really with gratitude towards who is perhaps the greatest college president of any university in the United States of America, here at Hampton. And I want to tell each and every one of the graduates, this is in fact my first physical visit to this school, but the truth of the matter is, this university, with its deep and rich tradition, has been spiritually in my life from my earliest of ages. Graduates from this university are a part of my own personal history, have been friends and family to my parents as they worked on their careers. Graduates of this university serve within my administration. Even my first chief of staff when I was a city council person was a Hampton graduate. This university has been a part of the inspiration of my life. Its graduates setting example and codifying within my heart what it means to live a great life. I graduated from Stanford University, and on my graduations, there were lots of jokes whenever I graduated. You know, I'd hear my granddad say, "You see, the tassel boy is worth the hassle." And one of the things my grandfather, of course, rubbed into me when I was graduating, and my dad too, he said, I see you weren't magna cum laude or summa cum laude, you were just thank you laude. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about. But I did graduate Stanford with honors by writing an honors thesis about one of your graduates, Booker T. Washington. And so for me to be here today is a culmination in my own personal career and an opportunity for me to be one small, minuscule part of a mighty, voluminous tradition. And this, to me, is something I was asked to understand on every one of my graduations, that you are a part of a tradition. Each and every one of the graduates today does not stand here on their own. They may have worked hard and sacrificed, but you all are a part of something and stand on the shoulders of giants before you, humble heroes, leviathans of love, daring dreamers, audacious actors, all who made today possible. I give great honor and respect to all the family members who are assembled around me today because they are a part of that tradition, but even deeper than that. This Hampton tradition, like a mighty river, courses into a larger body of struggle and sacrifice and love that gave forth this very moment in time. My parents tried to help me understand, not just on graduation days, but all throughout my life, a story very similar to each and every one of you. They wanted me to understand that I was the result of a grand conspiracy of love. My father tells me this consistently, that he was born a poor black child in North Carolina. Now, I have to tell you something. He now changes that story. His stories seem to have gotten a lot more dramatic over the years. So he's no longer a poor boy from North Carolina. He's just a po' boy. He says he couldn't afford the other two letters. His mama couldn't take care of him. And so it was a conspiracy of love in that North Carolina town. People who came together, put a roof over his head and food on the table. My dad told me even last Thanksgiving with tears in his eyes, he can't even remember the names of the folks when it was time for him to go to college and he wasn't gonna go, that put money together in envelopes to show him that they would help him pay his first semester's tuition. This was that conspiracy of love. It continued in my parents' life. I don't even know the names of these folks who helped my parents get their first jobs when they both graduated from their HBCUs and got to Washington, D.C., and companies weren't hiring blacks, and it was black people and white people, part of this conspiracy of love, who came together, opened up doors for them. Having my father become one of the first blacks hired by Sinclair Oil and one of the first black buyers for a department store. And then the two of them became two of the first blacks hired by a small tech company you all might not have heard of called IBM. The conspiracy continued. My parents went to New Jersey to work in New York, getting promotions and all excited, but they found out that folks wouldn't show black families homes in white neighborhoods. And incredibly, my family relied upon black folks and white folks who had come together to fight housing discrimination through this great organization called the Fair Housing Council, that every time my parents would go out and look at a house and they were told it's sold, they'd send a white couple right after them as a test couple named Mr. and Mrs. Brown, though they were not brown, they were white. The house that we eventually moved into, my parents were told it was sold, but the Browns went and it was still for sale. They put a bid on the house for my father and mother, and on the day of the closing, instead of the Browns showing up, my dad did, and a young lawyer whose name I do not know, and told the real estate agent he was in violation of New Jersey fair housing law. That real estate agent got so upset, got up and punched the lawyer, sigged the dog on my dad. Now the size of the dog has changed over the years. My dad insists it was Cujo. My mom whispers to me it was just Toto. But after a large court case and a lot of fanfare, we moved into that small town in northern New Jersey to become, as my father used to call us, 4 raisins and a tub of vanilla ice cream. And I would sit at this dinner table growing up with my parents looking at me and telling me, boy, you drink deeply from wells of freedom and liberty and opportunity that you did not dig. You eat lavishly from banquet tables prepared for you by your ancestors. You sit beneath the shade of trees that you did not plant. Boy, you need to recognize that. You are a part of something, a tradition in this country. You are a part of love, and you can't walk around here proud of your own accomplishments, acting like you hit a triple when you were born on third base. You need to recognize you are intimately and intricately connected to others. That is the true story of all those mighty streams that have flown into this body called America, is that we are connected to each other. Our histories are interwoven. This is a theme that comes from all of our cultures, how we need each other. In today's politics that tries to divide us, tear us one side to another, we need to understand we got here not because of left and right, but people with love in their hearts who came together and moved us forward. Like that African saying from East Africa that said, spider webs united could tie up a lion. Like the saying from East Africa that says, sticks in a bundle can't be broken. Like that saying from the Bible, whenever 2 or 3 are gathered together in his name, he is in the midst. Like that one word, one of the pillars of Islam that says Tawheed, which means we all share a common spirit, common soul, and one God. Like that Jewish leader who said, Jews together are strong, but Jews connected with other people are invincible. Like that black minister in a jail cell in 1963 who wrote those immortal words, more true today than then, that we are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a common garment of destiny. And so, if I may, in deference and recognition to the Hampton tradition, to the American tradition, to the truth of who we are, may I now flip the script. Because life is full of contradictions. If you want wealth, create value for others. If you want to fly, fall down often. If you want to be a winner, savor the lessons from loss. If you want to change the world, change yourself. I want to shift gears. Because as much as I want to talk about the importance of the collective, I actually want to leave you with a message of the individual. You see, it is about you. When I moved to Newark, New Jersey as just a 20-something, chasing after my dreams of being a part of this incredible American city, I moved on to Martin Luther King Boulevard in the Central Ward in the mid-90s, and it was a very dangerous neighborhood. Newark has incredible communities back then, but this one neighborhood was besieged by challenges. And I remember wanting to make a change, and somebody told me I had to go visit the tenant president in the high-rises that lived that were across the street from me. And I went over to meet this woman who was the tenant president named Miss Virginia Jones, and I knocked on her door feeling all full of myself, all important. I was a Yale law student at the time, and she opened the door and she said, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm Cory Booker, Yale law student." And she looked at me like she almost wanted to laugh, and she said, "Who?" And I go, "Ma'am, I live across the street. I've moved to town. I really want to help you." And she, at that moment, looked like she had sympathy in her eyes. And she said, "You want to help me?" And she goes, "Okay." And she pushes me back, closes the door. She goes, "If you really want to help me, follow me." And I said, "Okay." And she walks down 5 flights of stairs, across the street into Martin Luther King Boulevard, standing in the middle, and she says, "Boy, look around you and tell me what you see." And I go, "What do you mean?" She goes, "If you want to help me, first you got to tell me what you see around you." And I looked around and I did like I was told. I described the high-rises, graffiti, an abandoned house. I just kept talking, but the more I did, the more upset she looked. And finally, I stopped and I said, "What's wrong?" And she goes, "Boy, you need to understand something. You can't help me." And she started walking away, and I chased after her. I go, "I'm sorry, I still don't understand what you mean." And she looked at me hard, this woman that was just a 5 feet and a smidgen. At that point, she looked like she was looking down on me. And she said, "Boy, listen to me. The world you see outside of you is a reflection of what you have inside of you. And if you're one of those people who only sees problems, darkness, and despair, that's all there's ever going to be. But if you're one of those people who stubbornly, every time you open your eyes, you see hope, you see opportunity, you see love, you see the face of God, then you can be someone that comes up in here and helps me." She walked away, leaving me on the side of the street, looking down at my shoes, and I said, okay, grasshopper, thus ended the lesson. I went back to her, came correct, and I sat at this woman's kitchen table, commuting back and forth from law school, leaving distinguished professors of letters, and sitting with one of the wisest souls I ever met. As she and other African-American women sat around that table in a conspiracy of love, talking about how they were going to keep someone in their housing, talking about how they were going to help some young person that started to go astray, planning for the next event they were going to hold in the basement of that building to keep kids safe and focused, they showed me that real greatness does not lie in some single act of heroism. It lies in people that get up every single day with consistency and courage and go about in another day of loving, giving, showing their kindness and their decency to others. This is the truth of our history. We are here because ordinary Americans did extraordinary acts of love. And we must begin in our lives to have the courage to be who we were created to be, not to play small in this world, not to be a carbon copy of the person next to us. We were not born to fit in, we were born to stand out. What Lincoln said is so true. Everyone is born an original. Sadly, too many die copies. Don't die a copy. It's the biggest challenge I have found, not to be a leader in a city, but just every day to be loyal to who I am, to live life in accordance to my values. It's like the story of the great Gandhi, this incredible leader who a woman waited online to see him with her son and just walked up to him after hours of waiting and said, "Gandhi, you emphasize dietary discipline. My son eats too much sugar. Would you tell him to stop eating sugar?" And Gandhi looks at her kindly. After a few moments of thought, he said, "No, I won't." And she was upset. And he goes, "Look, come back in 2 months. Ask me again." And she left disappointed, waited 2 months, waited in the long line again, got to the front of the line and said, I'm back. My son, his health is deteriorating. I know he'll listen to you. Would you please tell him to stop eating sugar?" Gandhi gets up, walks over to the boy, puts his hands on his shoulder, looks at him compassionately and says, "My son, you must stop eating sugar." The boy was affected. The mother was happy. She turned to leave and suddenly stopped and turned around and said, "Why didn't you just tell my son to stop eating sugar 2 months ago?" And Gandhi looked at her patiently and with kindness and said, "Because 2 months ago, I was eating sugar." The simple truth I have found is that if I focus on telling my truth every day, if I dig in real hard, despite what the world is telling me, and live my authenticity, if I don't let circumstances define me, but know that my real power never lies in what circumstances I encounter, but will always lie in my response to those circumstances. I don't control the stimulus, but I control the response. And if within that response I can tell my truth, even in the smallest moments, I can make changes beyond my imagination. And the example I have for this may sound trivial, but when I was just a college student, I was on a plane flying from Newark to San Francisco to go to Stanford. And I tell you, it was one of those plane flights that I was dreading, but I got on there, and instead of it being a packed cattle car, which it was, I sat down in a row of seats. Even though everybody was crammed in there, my row of seats was all empty. It was just me, 2 seats. The door to the plane closed. And you have to understand, I was a tight end at Stanford football. You all have to close your eyes and just imagine me chiseled for a second. Right now, I just jiggle, but please work with me. And imagine me, this big Stanford football player, happy as can be. The door to the plane closes, and I start thinking to myself, God loves me more than these other people on the plane. And just as I'm getting really comfortable and starting to sing, yes, Jesus loves me, the door to the plane swings open, and the whole cabin fills up with a raucous cacophony. It was a scream like somebody was being injured, and everybody stopped what they were doing and looked at the door. What could be coming through? And coming through was a woman and a toddler and a baby. Everybody stopped what they were doing and looked at me, and I could see what they're thinking. You smug young man. Serves you right. And they came over to me, and suddenly I stopped singing my gospel spirituals, turned to the only Bible verse that seemed to make sense. I said, oh Lord, why hast thou forsaken me? And they came over and they said, we're sitting there, and this woman had this loudspeaker, a woofer and a tweeter of a baby, and it was crying so loud, and all I could think to myself, is this going to be the worst flight of my life? And then as they moved in and sat there, I had suddenly an evolved thought for myself at 19. I thought to myself, you're right, this is going to be either the worst flight of my life, or I could try to make it the best. You see, so many of us surrender our power to the stimulus and not realize that in our response, we could shape our world. Even in the smallest moments, every moment is a gift and an opportunity for you to tell your truth. They sat down and I started deciding to have fun. I started making faces at the baby, which I will not repeat here. I started playing tic-tac-toe and hangman with the young boy as we took off, and I started having a good time. The woman started seeming relieved. As soon as I got out of my own stress and plugged into her, I saw she was embarrassed, stressed out, and suddenly she started to relax. We started talking and laughing. I started telling that little boy all the best jokes I knew appropriate for a 9-year-old. Like, why did Tigger and Eeyore have their heads in the toilet? Because they were looking for poo. I'm sorry I went there. It was the quickest flight I ever had cross country. We landed, we exchanged addresses. We never kept in touch, but I felt great, she felt great. 5 years passed, 10 years passed, 15 years passed, and I was running for mayor of Newark, New Jersey in the middle of a street fight. On the toughest day when I was discouraged, I got a letter in the mail saying, you might not remember me, but I met you 15 years ago on a flight from Newark to San Francisco. My family owns a factory in Newark, New Jersey. We employ a lot of residents. I want you to come by because I've told them all about you and your character. The young boy that you told those horrible jokes to is now a man, wants to volunteer on your campaign. He became one of the best volunteers. And I tell you, she then wrote something that every politician in America, except for maybe Mike Bloomberg, who told me the best political advice I've ever gotten is, before you become a mayor, become a billionaire. But she wrote on the bottom of it, and we'd love to give you a campaign contribution. You see, every moment of your life, you have a chance to show the world who you are. We sacrifice those moments every day when we get distracted by the stress or the drama. We get so caught up in ourselves that we begin to lose ourselves to circumstances. I want to tell you right now, as I get ready to conclude, that this ain't always easy. I've been beat down by circumstances before. I've seen ugly sides of this country. that I hope to never see again. I know intimately that this nation, conceived in liberty, that professes to favor freedom, where children coast to coast say those words, those 5 profound words in a chorus of conviction, liberty and justice for all, that we have not accomplished that yet. And that the only way to do that is by showing the same loyalty and dedication as our ancestors did. And so, in honor of Mother's Day, I end with this last story. It was my first person I ever represented as a lawyer. I changed some of the facts just to respect for the family, but it was a woman who was very elderly. I went out to some public housing projects in New Haven, and she opened the door, and I'll never forget her face. She was old and had lines in her face. Her face looked like a map of a place I would never know. And she was broken and said to me that she was being evicted from her housing, because some of you might know this. They had a very draconian law that said if one person in her family was caught with drugs, the whole family would be evicted. And she had a special circumstance because she was old and had a serious problem with falling into seizures. And that's why she had some of the lines on her face that were scars. And she needed somebody to look after her. And she found her 19-year-old nephew who was caught with 38 vials of crack cocaine. And she was now being evicted. And I left her all upset and went back to my supervising attorney. And I said, we're going to fight this case. And she said, Cory, I see you're so full of righteous rage right now, but you have to understand these are almost routine. If you fight this case, you don't have that great of a chance of winning, maybe a 5 or 10% chance at best. You need to call her back here and explain to her all her legal rights and let her make up her own mind. You can't fight your fight. You have to represent her interests. And so I brought her in, drove her to the legal center, brought her in for a conference, and it was one of the worst hours of my life because all this woman of dignity and years could do was cry as I explained her situation and say over and over again, I've done nothing wrong. Why are they doing this to me? I've done nothing wrong. And finally, when I was explaining to her that she had only a small chance of winning, she put up her hand and seemed to disappear in herself. And then she opened her eyes and she said, I just need to know one thing. And I said, what? And she goes, if I decide to fight this case, will it help other people? And I said to her, I said, ma'am, you don't understand something. You only have about a 5 or 10% chance of winning in a fight, and most likely we'll lose. But if we do win, I guess, yes, it'll help us with the precedent. And before I could get into more of my legalese, she heard that yes, and she put up her hand again suddenly and closed her eyes and pulled into herself. And then she opened her eyes suddenly, and it seemed like her spirit was possessed. She curled up her fingers, slammed them on the table, and she said, then we will fight. And she stood up. And for a second, for that moment, I saw her truth. She was a woman of regality. She was a woman of dignity. She stood like Fannie Lou Hamer stood and said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. She stood like Martin Luther King stood and said, listen, change won't roll in on the wheels of inevitability. It must roll in on the backs of soldiers who are carrying it. She stood like Frederick Douglass and said, there will be no progress without struggle. And then she strode out of that room, down the hallway as I sat there looking at my supervising attorney. We just stared at each other until I remembered I had to give the woman a ride home. I chased after her, gave her the ride, worked on that case for 3 days. On the 4th day, I was working in my dorm room, and I got a call from my supervising attorney. I was preparing for one of the preliminary hearings, and she said, Cory, you got to stop. And I said, what? I'm busy. She goes, no, you need to hear me. I go, what's wrong? And she said, well, I've got some bad news for you. I said, okay, what is it? And she said, well, your client last night had a heart attack and died. I remember not even saying another word. I slammed down the phone. I felt my spirit filled with rage. I felt like cussing like a sailor. And then suddenly, as I was just getting animated, it was almost like an angel whispered in my ear and said, boy, pay attention. You thought you were there, the great Cory Booker there for your poor client. The truth is, that client was there for you. You see, there are forces in this world that have a dimension and a depth and a greatness that we have not fully made manifest. To me, that force is evident in every single one of us if we choose to reveal it. This nation of ours is not finished yet. It needs and yearns for and hungers for that force, and each one of you individually is that force. You are the manifestation of love, history, beyond history, of people who loved so much that generations unborn were given rise. You are the manifestation of your parents' and your grandparents' love. And now in this nation that has given us so much, you must decide, will you swear the oath? It's an oath my parents used to read me as a boy. It's an oath that was put forth by Langston Hughes, and it simply went like this when he called us: "Oh, let America be America again, the land that never has been yet, but yet must be, the land where everyone is free, the poor man, the Indian, the Negro, me. Who made America? Whose sweat and blood, whose faith and pain, whose hand at the foundry, whose plow in the rain, must make our mighty dream live again." Oh yes, I say it plain. America never was America to me, but I swear this oath: America will be. Class of 2012, swear your oath, not with words, but with how you live. Swear your oath, class of 2012, not with your hand over your heart, but with your hand outstretched to give, to serve, to help, to do. Class of 2012, swear your oath. And as you tell your truth to the world and connect to others who will do the same, I am telling you right now, your truth and that truth of others will finally be the truth that sets us free. Thank you very much.